All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. Hello everyone, I'm Sasha Wolf, recording from Woodstock, New York on a very cool and crisp fall morning. And I'm joined as usual by my good buddy, my friend, my pal, and my producer, without whom I would be lost, adrift, confused for sure. I'd be making 2 episodes when it should be 1. Mr.
Oh,
Mike...
that was a call that I think could have gone both ways.
I was like dead set, and now I'm dead set in a different way. But as Emerson said, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Mr. Michael Chauvin Dalton. Hello, Michael.
Hi there. Yeah, so people have no idea what we're talking about yet.
None.
But they will very soon. The episode is a little longer than usual, but not long enough, I thought, to break into 2. And
Right.
I think people are okay with longer episodes. In fact, I remember some time ago when we were really wondering what people thought of the show early on, and the people would say oh, that could have gone longer.
Right. I was convinced. Not sure why, unclear. Maybe it came to me in a dream, but I was convinced that all episodes had to stay under an hour.
Right.
And we're going to blow that out of the water today. Our guest was the wonderful, extraordinary, delicious Gregory Halpern. And we just, I love Greg. He's a friend of mine. I am completely, thoroughly in love with, seduced by his work, and between my adoration for the person and my respect and deep love for his work, I really wanted to talk to him for the entire day. But but so the episode is long, and so I thought it should be 2 episodes, and I think you were leaning towards 1, and I know you know best. It's like a father knows best situation. So we went with just 1 long episode, and then you said we'll keep the intro short, which by the way is already...
That's right.
That's
Let's keep talking about how long it is.
Short intro? What? This cannot be.
But just on that note, I mean, you can tell everything you just said. You can feel it in the episode, and even sort of the formalities are just gone. Just gone in this show.
Right. Yeah. Well, Greg and I have known each other for a while.
Yeah.
So, before we get to the episode, we have a few announcements. I just want to actually quickly give a shout out to our jury. Applications closed about a week ago for the Junior Fellowship. We had over 240 applications, which was really wonderful, about a 20% increase from last year. And
amazing. Yeah.
We've thrown those applications to our jury, and so a huge thank you to them. Amanda Bowe, a photographer and photo editor at the New York Times. Shayna Lopez, who's a curator at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Leslie Martin, the executive director of Printed Matter. Noah Lynn, an associate editor at Aperture. And Jenya Friedland, who's a photographer and an educator. Those wonderful people make up our jury this year, and I'm really...
Nice lineup.
Great lineup. I'm so grateful to them. So thank you one and all, and I can't wait to see who they choose as our 6 fellows for this year. So super exciting. What do you got?
So Picture House, The Small Darkroom, this Saturday, October 26th, which, depending on when you're listening to this, could be tomorrow, from 4 to 6 p.m., Matthew Genetempo will be discussing his new book, Dog Breath, published by
Yay,
Trespasser.
Matthew. Yay,
And they'll be
Picture
selling the
House.
book, and I imagine he'll be signing the book. So, I mean, that's fantastic. That
Yeah.
book is just beautiful.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful book. And I wish I was going to be there. I'm giving a talk at Bard for the photo students on Monday. And then I
that's
have to
nice.
be in the city on Tuesday. So Matthew, I love you, but I couldn't do that sort of a back and forth.
Well, I plan to be there.
Yes, I know. I'm going to miss you guys.
Yes, I know that was our plan to get together, but we'll figure something else out.
Yeah, well, you should come up. I mean, I know you're in New Jersey where they have trees. I do
Yes, we
realize
have
that.
trees.
But I want to say that the fall colors are so. I have a Japanese maple tree.
I love Japanese maple. when
Right
they're
next
bright
to my
red.
house. It is so red. It is extraordinary. I've been walking around Woodstock and the surrounding areas for the past couple of weeks like a person who's never seen fall before. Like I'm so enamored with like everything I'm seeing is so breathtakingly beautiful. I'm overcome.
Oh,
I
all right.
really.
So I have to get up there soon because we have drought
Yes.
fall in New Jersey. We're not getting the big colors.
Oh, yeah, no,
So,
the
yeah.
colors here are really, really, they're so extraordinary. I'm sorry, people, this is probably so boring, but I'm going to say it anyway. They're so extraordinary that there's a tree, I'm not even sure what kind of a tree it is, that we walk by, and when I say we, I mean Peanut and I. We walk by every morning, and it's dropped the most incredible array of small leaves. They're about the size of a quarter. They're really small. And
wow.
every day I've picked some up, and now I have a beautiful wooden bowl on my dining room table filled with these leaves. I'm so...
I
yeah.
definitely want to come up and see all of that. So, yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Anytime. So we haven't even really had a chance to talk about it because I've been so busy with foundation stuff, getting everything ready for the jury and whatnot. And honestly, I think I wasn't really worried because I felt really good about the conversation as I was having it and feeling like Greg was sharing so much, which I'm really grateful to him for. But anyway, what did you think?
No, that's exactly right. Greg is brilliant, but also very open and just shares so much of his process very personally. I think my favorite part is sort of throughout the episode, what you get is this sense of Greg, just thinking about and paying attention to the idea of when you're the photographer, when you're the editor, and when to sort of get out of the way and let people have their own experience with the work. And it was just so meaningful the way he approaches everything. And
Yeah.
I just loved it. Absolutely. Yeah, I learned so much in this episode. It was really fantastic.
Yeah, me too. I feel the same way. Yeah, it's a very process-driven episode, but it's so personal at the same time. So I think that there's a lot in this that people can learn from, but in a very really connected and generous way. So
Absolutely.
well, okay, let's get to it. I hope people enjoy as much as I did this very beautiful episode with my friend Gregory Halpern. Michael, if you don't mind, please take it away.
My pleasure. And here's your conversation with Gregory Halpern.
All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Here we go.
Cool. I like this. I feel like I'm on
Off to a
fresh
good
air.
start.
This is awesome.
Oh my God, I got to stop laughing. Gregory Halpern, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you, Sasha. It's awesome to be here.
So let's just be honest. We had to set up a quid pro quo because I couldn't get you on the show otherwise.
Quid pro quo.
We did. I mean, I was trying to get you on the show for a while. I didn't want to come on the show. And then you asked me to come up to Rochester to meet with some students of yours. And I had to sort of it was a version of myself I'm not proud of, by the way. I just want to say, not proud. But nonetheless, that's my dedication to the podcast. I was willing to be mean, Sasha. And I said, Greg, my friend, I'm going to come up to Rochester if you want me to come up to Rochester, but you got to come on the podcast. And you said, okay. So,
Rochester, it's not that bad. Come on.
No, I had a great time, actually. You have excellent students. You had excellent students for your summer session. Yeah, they were great.
We had an awesome time. I had forgotten that I had twisted your arm that way. So sorry about that.
And I was like, I have to twist it back.
Yeah. We had a great time though. It was
we
good.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Students loved you, of course.
I really loved your students. You had one student in particular who
Paul Bothwell, right?
He started to cry. Yeah. And it was it was just one of those things where it's so interesting. Like I thought about this when I was driving home in a terrible rainstorm that night and trying not to drive off the road. But I was thinking about him, and I was thinking, I wonder if he's embarrassed. And I was so moved by his deep emotion what he was reacting to is that I understood what he was trying to say, and that was in his work. And, for me, the experience was so positive and one I'll likely not forget because it just, reinforces something we all know about how powerful it is to be known when we're trying to communicate, and in this case, through art. But I was just thinking about, I wonder what his experience was of that moment. I wonder if, we're sort of feeling some of the same things, or if he left feeling at all awkward while I'm feeling so blessed to have had that experience.
Yeah, I don't.
But anyway, it was really
I think he didn't feel awkward. Was a beautiful experience. As a teacher, it's always such a juggling act. I'm trying to do my work, or be a dad, and then teach, and it's like I feel like I'm really struggling, and sometimes I don't have the bandwidth for it properly. And then you have a moment like that where, he'd been working on a project for many, many years about his family. And I think you got it. And he felt it meant so much to him, that he felt like seen and that you got the work. And it was like, I think he said to me, it hasn't been a waste. It was like, and that was profound.
Yeah.
It was sad to me that he thought
cry again.
It was, so that was beautiful though. That was a very cool experience. It's like, I guess with photography, it's so hard to know if you're communicating, if it's landing, if someone absorbs it the way you intend it to. And it's painful when it doesn't feel like it's working.
Right, of course. Right. Yeah. Or if it's landed, and this is so incredibly relevant to your work, but if you're someone who wants to make sure that you are leaving a tremendous amount of space for the person looking at the work to have their own experience. So, what is landing, right? Like some artists like Paul really want to get a certain message across. And then there are artists like you who, we'll talk about that. But before we get into that, will you do what we always do, which is tell the listeners about yourself and your journey, where you grew up and how you got to where you are today as a professor at RIT and a really celebrated photographer and artist.
Sure, yeah. I had forgotten that you do that, and
Me too.
I don't have my version. I'll figure it out right now on the spot.
Well, you know your life, so just.
I feel like I tell this story maybe too much, but I don't know how to start talking about like me and photography without it. So I'll just start with when I was 14, my dad brought home this book of photographs from the grocery store. It had been remaindered. It wasn't a successful photo book, but it was by this photographer, Milton Rogovin, who lived on the west side of Buffalo, where my dad still lives. And they were pictures of people taken every 7 to 10 years over the course of 20, 25 years. And the book was called Triptychs because he visited people 3 times. And art was not like a thing in my family. My grandma on my mom's side she made these ceramic, I guess, little sculptures of nude women and men. And she would take these live the arts, what's it called, the Art Students League in New York?
Yeah, Art Students League. Yep.
Art Students
on
League.
57th, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So she would go there with like live models. And so she was like the artsy person in my family, but my parents weren't like, art was just not a thing other than that. And then I looked at this photo book and I burst into tears when I was 14. And I always just think about that moment, like still so profoundly. Like I can just feel like the carpet under I was like sitting on the rug, and anyway, after that, I kind of knew that I loved photography, but after that, you have to see the book really to understand. But you see people age, you see babies born, and people die, and it's this amazing, very it's just the most simple project you could imagine. Totally,
It's very straightforward documentary style work, which not to be confused with anything having to do with street photography, because usually the people are posing in their homes or where they work or on the street where they live or whatever. But it's very straight ahead. Yes,
yeah, and I liked that. It didn't feel like it was trying to be art or trying. It was just what it was. And and that's how Milton was too. I got to know him a little. He was just a sweet, straightforward man. That sort of cemented something for me. But it took like another 10 years before I was like ready to say I'm going to like commit to being a photographer, because I just didn't think you could do it. Like it just didn't feel like an option. And I didn't study photography in undergrad. I took a couple courses with Chris Killip, which was an amazing experience.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Who I just got back from a memorial service for him, which was very moving. Yeah, I took electives in photography because that was as much as I was willing to. I couldn't commit to it beyond that. But he was amazing teacher, amazing person. And then a few years after undergrad, I decided to take the plunge and go to graduate school, where I went to California College of the Arts. And I had another like set of incredible teachers: Larry Sultan, Jim Goldberg, and Todd Heido.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I got very lucky.
And you really found your voice, I think, in that phase, which was interesting. And I want to really ask you about that, because I think that evolution is really fascinating. But I do just want to like bring us up to today, which is, you moved east and you've been a professor at RIT for, I think, 5 or 6 years?
Now it's 10.
Oh, wow, 10. Holy cow.
Yeah.
So from Buffalo and living in Rochester, so embracing the cold. I was actually meant to ask you before we started recording how cold it was there this morning, because it's very cold in Woodstock right now.
It was 40 when I woke up, which was very disappointing.
Oh, it was 32 here. So,
ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Frost on thank God yesterday I got my herbs in the ground. Anyway. All right, so much to discuss. I'm glad you brought up Milton Rogovin, because I think it's fascinating your evolution from shooting in a sort of Rogovian way, which you were doing when you were at Harvard. And you really started, as you said, you were taking photo electives and working with Chris Killip, which is amazing. But you were really shooting in a very Rogovin-esque way. And yeah. I am also a huge Milton Rogovin fan, and he had a big impact on me as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I actually had the incredible fortune a very long time ago. This was probably about 2004, I'm going to guess, of a few years before Milton died, of helping to place a very, very large quantity of Rogovin photographs with a collector.
Wow.
I won't get into the whole story, but I got to look through hundreds of Milton's prints, and I wound up with 3 of them, which sadly, after 2008, when I had an art gallery to feed, I had to sell.
Oh,
no, heartbreaking. But anyway, but I got to live with them on the walls for a bunch of years, and that was really exciting. And what is art but something that you're a custodian of for a while, and then you pass it on, so it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, big Milton Rogovin fan. So
cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating to me that you were I know you love Larry's work. I mean, I know you love that type of work, and Todd, and the very lyrical and poetic type of photograph. Obviously, that's what you do. But I think it's fascinating when someone also reveres a type of artwork, but it's not in them to make it. And that sort of moment where you realize, I really love this, but it's not really the voice that wants to come out.
Yeah.
Did you have that moment where you thought, wow, I really love this, but it's just ultimately not who I am?
That's a good question. I think what happened was I realized as a young photographer, I was just trying to be Milton. And I think that that's like a thing that a lot of people do and kind of have to work through. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, I felt like, at least aesthetically, I felt like, I can kind of do my own version of Milton. And that was exciting, But it also ultimately, it wasn't sustaining because it felt like I'd figured out a few, some technical tricks to like get your your work looking like someone's and all that. But it didn't feel like, it didn't feel like it was my voice, or I guess I got bored. I felt like I had created a formula or something that I was following, or a machine. And also the first work I did was a very political kind of activist work, which, again, I felt like I had set myself up with a project to make a point about, one thing in the world that bothered me and that I thought should change. And the photographs were really working towards that agenda. And it felt totally unfulfilling to me. And like to this day, I'm very skeptical of any I became an activist, like a political activist for a number of years. And I'm skeptical of like people who are certain, 100% certain of like what needs to happen or how to fix a problem, and I'm skeptical of art that is that clear about the world. I don't trust it, because having made a body of work, and I know how I edited it. I know the images I cut that were decent pictures, but that didn't work for the agenda. Like I know, I know how I told that story in such a way that, I was like, in some ways I've been reacting to it ever since, because I felt like, and that was like a 7-year gap between that book, which was called Harvard Works Because We Do, which was basically the union's slogan, and 7 years later to my next book, which was called A. Even the title is like the polar opposite. It's like, the first title is very clear what I'm saying, and the next title is, you're not even sure if it is a title. And so there was a 7-year process of me like going to graduate school, thinking about photography and trying to like think about it as its own language and how I want to speak it. That was sort of that time period for me, where I really thought I was lost for a lot of that time. But in retrospect, it kind of like felt like a totally natural 7-year process of like reading and thinking and looking at photo books and opening my mind.
Yeah. And you emerge out of that, going from black and white, very straightforward document type work, where I'm sure you were grappling with what is the truth. My position here in this activist work is that I know what the truth is, and I know you well enough to know that there's no way that was a comfortable fit, and which I love about you, and the forever existentialist, and then emerging into the light or dark or both with the book A. And then, of course, everything that came after that, and, ZZYZX, Omaha Sketchbook, Confederate Moons, East of the Sun. That is not in chronological order. I'm just rambling or rattling off your titles. And then we get to where we are today, King, Queen, Knave, which is your new really magnificent book with MACK that I don't even know if it's available yet. We're recording on the 15th of October. Is it available yet?
It is actually, yeah, it is available.
Okay. I'm sure it's probably sold out already.
I was really shocked and happily surprised. They printed 3,000, and apparently they're getting ready to do another print run very soon already.
I'm sure it's sold out in pre-order. Well, first of all, huge congratulations on the new book. It's really extraordinary. And as someone who knows your work fairly well, it's really been amazing for me the past couple of weeks to really be looking at all your work, thinking about your work, thinking about the differences in your work, the similarities, the way it's really become very much a photograph that we're presented with. We, the viewers, the photographs that we're looking at from you are really Greg Halpern photographs. And yet the emphasis from project to project, I would say between, and I'm going to use this word very, very loosely, but between fact or document and fantasy or dream, light and dark literally, light and dark metaphorically, saturation levels, these differences really ebb and flow from project to project while maintaining, a real through line as far as the visual language and as far as subject matter and your way of looking at the world. So that's my analysis. But I want to ask you.
I like
ahead.
that. I like that analysis, by the way. Thank you.
Okay.
I feel seen.
Good. Okay. That's awesome. Hopefully we can maintain that through the rest of the conversation. So let me ask you a really macro question before we get into sort of, although maybe it's not even a macro question. I guess I'll let you decide. But in this day and age, I feel like so many of the books, the photo books that I look at, that I have, that I get, rely heavily on text. Text, I think, is really in right now as a complement. I'm not talking only about academic text, which has always been a big part of photo books, but also I'm thinking of like Jess Dugan writing really beautifully for their last book as almost sort of prose poems throughout. I'm thinking of Kelly Connell, who created this just sort of masterful Pictures for Caris project book, where the pictures are woven in with basically a memoir, which is quite extraordinary. But many books in sort of that vein right now. You are on the extreme other end. This is another book of yours with zero text, which means that when you approach it, if you don't know, if you haven't Googled or you don't know you or you're not in our ecosystem, you don't even know where the pictures are made. There's no titles, there's no nothing. So tell me about that decision and how you think about that, pros and cons.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Google because it does feel like it's not that hard for someone, if they're intrigued or curious or put off or whatever, to figure out, you can find, say, the publisher's description or something. And in a way, that's a crutch that makes it easier to do like what I'm interested in doing, which is to make these, I think of them as just objects that exist in the world that are there to be received, hopefully, by a viewer, and for the viewer to sort of read them. I think of it as like reading, because I want them to be active and analytical and have feelings and investigate the feelings and complete the work in a way. I'm not a huge theory person, but there's this famous Roland Barthes essay, Death of the Author, which I do love, and I like that idea that like the author is sort of dead when the work is put out into the world, and then the viewer, the reader, kind of like breathes life into it through interpretation. And I don't know, I had an experience with occasionally with like a Japanese photo book, for example, where I couldn't read anything. This happened to me a few times, and I found that experience to be quite profound. And I loved it. I really loved not being able to read about the work. I mean, I knew I could find it if I wanted to, but I didn't feel like I needed it. And I think in some ways I'm also still reacting to like that earliest work I made, which was like, there was so much text and politics and, multiple essays and oral histories. And it was a bit of a lecture, Like the experience was a bit of a lecture, and I felt like I was condescending towards my viewer, and I was. I also feel like you said there's this astute observation that like I'm not a good activist because I'm always like uncertain, and I think that the work is like questioning. Yeah. And that's how I like think about the world. Is it's just question after question. So the work in that way feels really honest about how the world feels to me at times. You know,
I think your work is a question. That's the way it feels to me. I mean, some people put out bodies of work where they're, you know, really leaving a lot of room for the viewer's interpretation, but they have a pretty good sense of exactly how they feel or exactly what they're saying. With your work, I almost feel like you're a viewer also. Like you could feel differently about your own work from day to day. You could have different interpretations of your own work. There is so much left unsaid and unknown in your work that I can't imagine that you're not in the same position to some extent that we are. I mean, I know you know where the pictures were made, and obviously with your portraits, you're not a street photographer, so they are in collaboration with your subject, and there's a certain amount of direction and whatnot. But I feel that your work is so much you somehow bringing forth your unconscious self into the pictures that I can't imagine that you don't. I mean, tell me whether this is right or wrong, but you know, I feel like you must look at some of your images and just have totally different responses to them from day to day or month to month or year to year.
That's interesting. You picked up on that. I think, unfortunately, you're right. I say unfortunately because, you know, the oldest pictures in this book are like 20 years old. And yeah, I was going to do this book with Michael like a few years ago. And each year when the deadline got close, I said, Michael, I just need one more year. And I did that like 3 times. And it became like absurd because, you know, I'm fascinated with Buffalo. I go there all the time. I photograph there all the time. Like I've had a lot of time to think about this and work on this. And I just still wasn't certain. I didn't feel like I had the right edit. I felt like there were pictures I needed to make still. And it was it got to a point where I think it was like, what's really going on here? Like, am I scared of ending this project or something? But you're totally right. Like I need like a lot of time to, ideally, like my favorite way to edit is to make the picture and then like not look at it for many, many years, because then I can see it more clearly, you know, like, and I'm separated from that experience of taking the picture. I can like see it for what it is now as a picture.
Let me just jump in for a second. And also, you really don't want the editing process in the shooting process. I know that about most artists, but I know that is a particular stance of yours that's very important to you in the way you make work. And I think that's quite prudent. The maker and the editor are 2 parts of your brain and shouldn't be trying to work simultaneously.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that if you think there's still work to be made, you also are concerned about bringing your editor self in too early. And I'm sure that it must be really difficult to figure out when. I knew this conversation with you was going to be freewheeling, by the way. So here it goes, because now I'm gonna bring in ZZYZX.
Okay.
I know that, like with ZZYZX, you know, you sometimes refer to ZZYZX as a slightly post-apocalyptic sort of vision, you know, a sort of theme that runs through ZZYZX, which is this, you know, book that really, let's just say it clearly and not beat around the bush, sort of really put you on the map in the art world. It won the Perry Photo Aperture Photo Book Award in 2016, I believe it was, and just really catapulted you into the sort of public sphere. Everyone knows who you are, has known who you are since ZZYZX, a really magnificent book. But I wonder, like, even with ZZYZX, if you start thinking, wow, this is sort of has this almost post-apocalyptic, dreamy, dream world feel to it, at what point does that make you then start shooting that way? Like, because that's almost an editorial observation, so I was actually thinking about, like, with ZZYZX, at one point, did you go from just shooting ZZYZX to starting to direct ZZYZX?
Yes, I'd say. I think I would say that there were these periods of time where I would go back, because I was living on the East Coast. I did move to LA for the last year to work on ZZYZX, but there were a good 5 or plus years of just going back and forth. And so when I would go back to the East Coast, I would look at the work. And that does inform how you go shoot the next time, which can be helpful. I guess in a way it could close down your vision or lead to, like, directing is an interesting word. Yeah. But for me, it's helpful because I love to wander and I love to just go out and, like, be surprised by the world. But I need, like, as the project goes on, I need to, like, have a little bit more, I need to start closing off some doors.
Yeah, putting parameters in place, so
So those, like, months of, like, being on the East Coast and looking helped me figure out, okay, certain things, certain subjects or places or color palettes or whatnot weren't probably going to work, and then and so slowly the feeling becomes a bit more clear over time. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, what it sounds like is that there's a period of just making, and then there's a period of starting to think about putting up parameters so that you do have a clear color palette. The way you're working with light is consistent. And you want a certain amount of portraits. You want a certain amount of portraits of objects. You want a certain amount of landscapes. And you have to then start filling that out. But I'm sure it's a real balancing act with, when do you invite the editor in a very sort of forceful way, when, trying to keep the editor from being too bossy, and still leave room for experimentation and playfulness and surprise. And then at a certain point, having to have the editor completely take over. I mean, I'm sure it's funny because when you think about the process, it's almost like there's two people. But of course, it's you. It's just one person. And having to sort of divide yourself into two different people and, who's in charge when. And that negotiation, I think, is something that is so incredibly important in the artistic process, but can take quite a long time to figure out that negotiation. Yeah,
it's funny. I really get distracted by, when I'm shooting digitally, for example, when I can see the pictures while I'm shooting. And it sounds silly, and I've tried to force myself, to work that way because it would be so much more practical. But I do feel like when I'm trying to be really present photographing, I just need to be looking and reacting and not overthinking. If I overthink, I can get in the way. Yeah, there's these 10 rules for students and teachers that John Cage kind of made famous. And one of them, rule 8, was do not try to create and analyze at the same time. They are different processes. And, I remember reading that and thinking, okay, thank you. It made me feel like justified in being like, in separating them in my mind. But, I also do rely on other people. That's really helpful for me. My wife, Ahndraya Parlato, who's a photographer, of course, is crucial to looking at my work and being real. She knows me and the work better than anybody. And so she's brutally honest. And that's really helpful. Jason Fulford, the photographer, publisher, was crucial to me, like in my early years, like making and then figuring out early on, like what ZZYZX would be, super helpful to me, looking at the work and putting it together. So having those trusted. Yeah, totally. Sure. I mean, I wish I could be the kind of artist that's like, alone in their room and it's like this genius thing comes out, but I need to kind of talk to people and see it through their eyes. And then, I think that's incredibly important. How can you,
First of all, we know that the idea of the sort of lone genius it's been debunked because it's impossible to know how someone else is going to react to something. And, we're trying to communicate, for God's sake. So
yeah, exactly. Especially because I don't have text. I need to see how is this picture landing? How does it feel to you? And then to use that information because I do want to communicate, it's not just like I need to make this picture and put it out in the world for me. Like I want it to resonate and make someone feel something, close to what I felt. So yeah, I do need people to look along the way to tell me if it's doing what I think it's doing.
So what do you want people to feel? I mean, your work is, let's sort of focus for right now on ZZYZX and on King, Queen, Knave, because I think in some ways Omaha Sketchbook is a little bit more straightforward. And I would actually like to talk about why that is. But let's just start by talking about ZZYZX and your new book, because they feel the most similar to me. I mean, just to be clear, ZZYZX is way more out there. A lot of people have experienced ZZYZX and been... And I know this because I talk to people all the time. And when it came out, and for many, many years, it was sort of top of mind for a lot of people. It was quite puzzling for people, that vision that you conjured forth, especially for people who didn't know, who didn't maybe Google and didn't seem to really know I can't say story behind it, but what your motivations were. I remember talking to a number of people where I sort of explained, I filled in some things because I knew a bit more than they did. And, if you're just coming to ZZYZX, it's quite disturbing in many ways. And I think you know that. You've said before that you like making people uncomfortable in your pictures. And that's a place where you sit as a image maker often, not always. And then, King, Queen, Knave is not off kilter in that way that ZZYZX is. It feels more like a world that is recognizable, but it is also, I found it very provocative. I mean, the first third of the book, more or less, is very dark, literally, again, and figuratively. And it was tough to push through. I mean, I don't mean that I literally couldn't turn the page, but it's intense. And, you then give us a bit of a reprieve that ebbs and flows somewhat. It ultimately is, I don't want to say hopeful, but it doesn't end with that intense darkness that happens in that sort of, that's going on in that first third. But it's still going to really push people into some uncomfortable places. So can you talk about that desire in you to take us to those places, and maybe with the new book, maybe flesh out a bit what I'm referring to, because I know you know what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I think they are really, in some ways they're made from really different places, the two books, although there's definitely some overlap in the sense that they're worlds unto themselves, and then each place has a specific sort of temperature, color palette, sensibility. Maybe there's a feeling of magical realism that exists in both of them. So there's certain things that definitely overlap. With ZZYZX, I feel to me, that's kind of how Los Angeles does feel, is a profoundly, it's a place that is profoundly uncomfortable, but also weirdly, stunningly beautiful at points, and totally full of despair, and yet also totally full of hopes and dreams. With sort of a California psychedelic sensibility to the end of the world could be at any moment. A city existing basically in a desert, or right next to a desert. I mean, it does feel fantastical extreme wealth next to an unbelievably massive homeless population. I mean, talk about uncomfortable. And what I like about, like, I don't want to make people uncomfortable just to be provocative, but when people,
I know you don't.
Yeah, like I don't like when work does that. But for me, like if I'm going to make a body of work that's inspired by Los Angeles and not take on the fact that there's like 50,000 people on any given night supposedly sleeping on the streets, I mean, that feels like then I'd be producing yet another like Hollywood vision of America. And that's fascinating to me, that like this image factory that's usually, portraying like upper middle class or upper class folks is in the middle of this city, which is can be a really dark place, but Hollywood, of course, doesn't ever usually go there. I mean, they probably do occasionally, but not usually. And like that interests me that was uncomfortable. That felt like a taboo to talk about Los Angeles that way. And I like bringing stuff into the pictures that is on people's minds, but that isn't spoken about. And so I think that's uncomfortable for people, though. For a number of reasons, especially now the work is read differently. I think people are increasingly sensitive to how, for example, people on the margins are portrayed, rightfully so. But I think it's even more uncomfortable now for people. But that doesn't bother me, because I think that's okay. I think it's okay for people to sit with that and investigate why is it uncomfortable, and not jump to any sort of like quick decisions about why it is uncomfortable, but to just think about that. And also like those feelings change. Like there's a first viewing, and then over time there's another viewing, and I think that's really interesting too, to like look at a work more than once before you decide how you feel about it.
And then with the new book, which is an exploration of your hometown, Buffalo, New York, where you grew up and lived until you left for college, and a place where you go back very often, A, because you grew up there, and B, your father still lives there. You have family there and deep connections. Your ambivalence, well, it's not ambivalence. That's not the right word. Your your feelings about Buffalo feel like a tree with many branches, and no branch sort of more dominant than another in a way. It feels like a project where you just refuse to, and I think that this is a real hallmark of you as an artist. You just refuse to pick a lane, and somehow it all works out. It doesn't feel disjointed, or there's no lack of cohesion. I mean, it's, if anything, the exact opposite. But it is so all-encompassing. And as usual, as we're saying, that includes the darkness. And I wonder if that darkness is, if you feel it the way, like I'm describing, I felt it. And, if you see that in the pictures, if that's your experience.
Definitely. I mean, the city... So yeah, just I think to back up, like I'm fascinated by the life cycle and how to picture it. Yeah, it sounds dark, but I think death is one of those things that is on people's minds, whether they want to admit it or not. And it's one of those things that gives our lives meaning, to be aware of it. And because it's present, the seasons are, the cosmos and the seasons are like a reminder that we're very small and insignificant among these much larger forces. And I try to produce that feeling, which is one of the ways I try to communicate. And the life cycle itself is like it could be pictured literally, through like a plant or an aging person, but it's there in a number of ways too. Like, okay, so the city's history is hard to ignore. It was once an industrial powerhouse, but now almost all industry has left, and the city's population is half of what it once was, which is a pretty amazing fact to think about, like the number of empty buildings and houses and ghosts that feel present there. But it's not a hopeless place by any means. Babies are born there every day. People fall in love every day. And that was what interested me, was like life and death feeling present in the same moment, in the same picture, entropy and like resistance to it. So is like a theme. So you'll see images that reference gravity or the resistance to it. So like floating and falling, images of brokenness, but also repair or rebirth. And there's this phrase that Robert Adams is sometimes people quote that I love, which is he wanted to make pictures that affirm life without lying about it. And I think about that. Like I do want to affirm life, but I think it's false, and it's the language of advertising to do that without acknowledging the presence of death and despair. Also, it just feels dishonest. So that's how I think of it.
Yeah, those are those different branches of the tree. A different artist might, and I see this all the time, might feel the need to choose one of those in the project. And that's not at all, what you do.
I think for me, that's also like about embracing a lack of clarity or sort of singularity of vision, which also feels sort of dishonest or disingenuous to me. Photographers sometimes do this because, we're pointing the camera at things, but really what we're doing is excluding things with these four edges of our frame. And then we make these projects which, exclude, you could think of it as selecting a subject, but really you're excluding stuff. And so I'm always thinking about like, what's outside the frame, and how can I complicate the reality or make the reality feel as complicated and confusing as it feels to me. And so that's sort of another way.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad you just said that. And because I think that's exactly what it feels like to engage with your work, and, so well said. And I think that's why it's both, an overwhelmingly fulfilling experience and also sort of devastating, right? It's like, oh gosh, why does he have to include all these dark images? Why does this is so hard to look at? This is, but of course, that's who you are, and to be really honest about our experience here and not spare us and make us confront the difficult and do it in that way that is so beautiful and with a great deal of visual seduction, which I think is what art is. And
what's funny though is like sometimes I think the most like despairing picture is like one of those mall pictures you would have gotten where you're just like painfully smiling so hard, and you put on this quote like nice outfit that doesn't quite fit properly and is uncomfortable, and you're trying so hard to like push away the despair. It's like sometimes a forced smiling picture is the saddest thing I've ever seen. And it's like, for me, it's like less sad to actually look at the challenges around us and just see them and acknowledge them. So I know there's darkness in the book, but I guess I don't see it as in the end as like a vision of total darkness or despair, because
I don't think it is either. I think you just make us go through that tunnel. And but I really, really respect that. And I know from my own former life as a writer and a filmmaker that it was very hard for me to write things that were really sad, because I would get really sad. I mean, you absorb that. So it takes a certain amount of, I think, bravery and fortitude to stay in that space. And of course, that continues from making the picture to editing. And the editing process is often quite long. So you have to really sit with that, and I think that takes a lot. One thing I really want to get to, I think is really important, and I know you've talked about this before, is sort of the insider-outsider conundrum. You've made work in places, incredibly comprehensive projects in places where you are not from. We've mentioned Omaha Sketchbook, which is, I think, a really stunning photo book, one of my favorites, one of the best, I think, that's been made, both in terms of content and also form.
Thank you.
You did a project in Guadeloupe when you won the Hermès prize, and other places, and then you've You've, like ZZYZX, of course, Los Angeles, and then this book that we're talking about now is your hometown. And yet, as I know you've discussed with this project, because you left to go to college and you don't live there now, you are sort of both an insider and an outsider. And I think that this sort of, this topic is incredibly important. And I think that obviously going in and photographing in a place that you know nothing about is problematic, obviously. But there are also advantages, because you see things with fresh eyes, but also there's something that happens when you photograph, let's just talk about, for the sake of this conversation, a childhood home. I've heard you talk about this project, this new book, and talk about the knowledge that you have of Buffalo because you come from Buffalo. But when I think about these pictures and I think about this project, I don't think about your knowledge of Buffalo. I think about your feelings about Buffalo. To me, this book isn't about your knowledge of Buffalo so much as it is about your childhood feelings. I mean, what is more profound than the feelings, the most primal emotions in us that are developed in childhood? And so to me, that's what this book really brings forth. And that is incredibly loaded. And so, one can understand how something really magnificent can come out of that. And one can also understand how something quite convoluted can come out of that, right? Because it's so profound, those feelings. So I don't know where the question is in that, but I wonder, if that makes sense to you, what I'm saying, that this feels more to me, I guess, about very, very primal feelings as opposed to just straight knowledge.
Yeah. I love the way you put that. I think I didn't realize that that's what I was doing until sort of significantly deep into the project, and letting any sort of need to tell a story or show Buffalo, sort of letting it go to be really inspired by the place, my memories of the place, my feelings of the place, and letting that sort of drive the work. I mean, it sounds sort of like a cliche or oversimplification or something, but I think of it as like a short story inspired by the place and my experiences there. Or maybe a short film is a better way of putting it. And my childhood is like, I never really wanted to like make work about me or anything. But I the number of the pictures are in like, a childhood neighborhood, or like my high school or middle school, like is like the playground, the playing field is like in two of the pictures. And like there are a lot of these places that I've just visited, spent a lot of time at. Some of the people I've known for a long time, some I just met briefly, but yeah, definitely like all that stuff is in there, but it's more just sort of the source for the pictures. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't even, I wasn't even thinking like about specific places or things like that. I'm thinking about, this is where you became a person. This is where you witnessed your parents' love for one another and their marriage dissolving. This is where you learned everything, how to walk, how to talk. This is where you probably first fell in love or had your first crush or got your heart broken or someone was mean to you or you made a best friend. I mean, I know when I go back to, certain places that were very important from my childhood, that I become overwhelmed with all those feelings. It's like they come rushing back in and color almost everything I say and do in that space.
Yeah, totally. It's like it's not easy. It's weird how it can be really hard. And I had by all standards, like a good childhood and like, loving parents. But yeah, it's very hard. It was a relief to wrap this project up because now I don't need to go back there with my camera. I mean, I can go back and visit my dad and visit friends, but I don't need to engage with it the way I have been. And it does feel somehow like there's always loss when I think about like childhood or I don't know why. Maybe that's why there's so much sense of loss.
Because you grew up.
Yeah.
Because you grew up. I mean, going back to a childhood home, for those of us who left and go back, not everyone has that experience, but is incredibly profound. I think it's one of the most profound experiences. And I also know that you were also somewhat of an outsider in Buffalo. And, you know, I think that is in the work as well, which is fascinating, being both an insider and an outsider, literally just from, you know, you were a Jewish kid in a part of Buffalo where there were almost no other Jewish kids. Your family is an immigrant family. I think your great grandparents and, you know, I mean, so I think that's all in the, I'm sorry, I'm really analyzing you now, but anyway,
no,
that's what I got from the work.
It's totally there. Like, yeah, my grandfather actually came to the U.S. We're Jewish. Yeah. He came from what's now Ukraine. Actually, it was Hungary at the time, but he came from right before the Second World War. And but the rest of our family was killed by Nazis. And he came into the U.S. illegally and, you know, started over. And we were the only Jewish kids in our high school. There was one other kid, but like he kept it pretty quiet, you know. And it's a strange feeling, you know. It's a strange feeling that informs maybe the way you grow up and you see the world and whether you know how you fit in or don't fit in. And it's like the insider outsider thing. The conversation of photography is a really interesting one to me. But I'm like increasingly of the mindset that you're never an insider or an outsider, no matter who you are, what your identity is, or what your relationship is to people. I mean, it's useful for people to claim certain statuses for certain projects. And I get there are certain things, like I am from Buffalo. I know this place pretty well. But it's like, I think you pick up a camera and you're an outsider. You know, I mean, there's degrees of it. It's not black or white. But it's like, I always struggled with my own relationship to that place and the people. And I actually think that's a useful place to be as a photographer, to have some insider knowledge, but to not be so like stuck within it that you can't also see it from the outside, which can be really useful. You know what I mean? And all you need to do is like look at Robert Frank's Americans to be reminded that like an immigrant came to the US and like showed us America in a way that no one had, you know, before, and changed photography and changed the way we see America. And it's like, that's a great reminder, I think.
So I want to get to a handful of process questions, but even before I do that, I don't know why. This is like a weird tick I have on the podcast where I'll say like what I'm going to ask, but then I'll be like, but before I do, let's just talk a little bit about your extraordinary way of shooting people and faces, because I think that you're one of the most unique people portrait photographers. How you frame and how you see people and what you, in this case, you were talking earlier about excluding, but I'm going to say what you include. There's a defiance almost in some of the portraits. I'm going to make sure that this person who may look downtrodden, that there are some flowers off to the side that are beautiful, so I can make clear that no one is all one way or the other. But there's always just so much complexity in your photographs of people. Can you talk about that and how you interact with people and what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think that if you look at a face and you see contradictory traits, or you see you somehow the complexity of what it is to be a person and all of those challenges that we all have, if that is somehow visualized, to me, that is the definition of beauty. And I find myself always moved by faces when I see that, or I feel it somehow, like a person's visual appearance can like articulate something that maybe I have felt but hadn't been able to articulate or put into words, and I see it in someone's face. For example, a simple example would be like a young man who exudes a certain kind of confidence or machismo, but there's like vulnerability that they probably don't want to project, but is visible. And that to me is profound and beautiful. I love this idea that like people try to project certain things, but fail, right? Because they're not just that thing. They're lots of things at the same time, which in a way also gets at the title for me, which was like, it came from this picture, which has the words King, Queen, Jack in it. But I somehow was reminded that the old fashioned term was knave for Jack, which could also mean like a person of like a questionable character, whatever that means. You know what I mean? And I like this idea that each person has those three traits or has those things inside them, that you don't know, you never know who they are. And they don't necessarily even know, because all of those things are in them. And, when I was a kid, I'd visit my grandma in New York. She was the one who would sculpt the little nudes. And,
I love that about her, by the way.
Yeah. She was like the coolest grandma ever. And, we would go into New York, and we were totally like country bumpkins, but we had this really cool grandma, and, we would ride the bus with her, and I remember there were these seats on the bus, where you sometimes you face forward on the bus, but sometimes there are those seats where you face with your back to the window. So you're facing a stranger. Across from someone. Yeah. And I remember once or twice she had to be ask me not to stare at strangers, what I mean? But I loved that. It was so exciting because we didn't really, ride the bus where I was, grew up. And so I don't know, there's something amazing about this power that a face can have for another person. And I love the fact that a stranger, who's viewing the work, can look at another stranger and feel something. And I'm always sort of moved and amazed by that fact, that really simple fact. Why should we care about the face of this person we will never meet or ever see? But I do feel there's something really mysterious and hopeful in that, and that it does have something to do with love. And as vague as that sounds, it's one of those things that remains really moving for me when someone allows me to sort of look at them and look at their face, make a picture of them and their face. I'm always so grateful, because it's it can be very vulnerable, if you let your face relax. And I always want people to relax. That's what I want, is to let their face be open. And if they do that, it's an incredibly generous, trusting thing, and it's very moving. It can be very moving.
How do you get them to that space? Do you know when you're talking to someone and meeting them, do you think they're probably going to go there with me? Or do you ever meet someone you think you want to photograph, and then as you're talking to them feel, I don't think I'll get there with them. Maybe I'll move on, or, what is that process?
It's, I don't always know how it's going, because I get really swept up and excited almost whenever someone says yes. And it's it's a real thrilling experience, and it's nerve-wracking and awkward too, often, because if you don't know each other. But I just get swept up in it, and I just think I always think this is beautiful, and then later
so fantastic.
Later on, it's I look at the film and I think, oh boy, maybe I shouldn't have spent 4 hours and 10 rolls of film on that. But it's always interesting. I don't always know. Sometimes I do this little thing at the end of the day where I make notes and I think which ones worked, and then I compare. I compare later, but it doesn't always line up what I think worked in the moment and what actually worked later.
Well, how could it? Because you're having an experience that is hard to separate, right, from the photograph itself. So.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about another sort of process question, the difference between, and let's stick with King, Queen, Knave, otherwise in exhibition form known as 19 Winters, 7 Springs. So I want to talk about titling things differently for different venues or whatever the word would be there, and different sequencing, because I didn't get to see the exhibition of the Buffalo work. It was at Transformer Station. It was at the George Eastman House, but I did get to see an installation view online at the George Eastman House. Thank you very much, George Eastman House. That was quite fun. I did the virtual tour.
Oh,
I love
okay.
a virtual tour.
I didn't realize that was online. Okay.
Yeah, it's super cool. I really enjoyed it. It was like Zillow, except it was a Gregory Halpern exhibition. So they were like, "Would you like to take the virtual tour?" And I was like, "Hell yeah!" So you have the exhibition, the exhibitions of this body of work, but it's got a different title, and the sequencing is completely different. Feels like the emphasis was different. So there's also the inclusion, and we can talk or not talk about this, it's up to you, but there's also the inclusion of sculptures, these really beautiful, wonderful sculptures that you made of houses that are obviously three dimensions. But what's really interesting is the houses have 2 sides, and maybe even 3 in some of them anyway, and then they're open in the back, and you included photographs from a different body of work or in that open space in the back of the houses. But we can talk about that or not. But the thing I'm most interested in is how you decided to sequence so differently, and also the different names.
Yeah, the sequences were, well, at Eastman, that was a super collaborative process with the curator, Phil Taylor, who was amazing to work with. And we made it, the Eastman Museum made this miniature of the space, and we had, little miniature photographs made, and we played with that for like months. I mean, that was like such a luxury. It was fun to just pop in there, every few weeks we'd look at it and move stuff around. And it's taken me a little bit of time to get to the point where I know I need to let the book go as a thing. I mean, I do really traditionally think in book form, but I've gotten to the point where I realize if I think about the book too much when I'm making the exhibition, it fails in a way, because I want the feeling of the work to come through. But in order to do that, I have to treat the room as an experience, really. Of course, totally. Yeah, and that's been, I feel like it's just in the last few years I've started to feel more comfortable just like walking into a space, 3 dimensions, and being like, okay, how do we make this experience do what the book is doing? And it really, in order to do that, I have to forget about the book. Right. And it's that was unsettling for me for a long time, because I just didn't think in 3 dimensions or spatially at all. But I've started playing with size and, as you mentioned, sculpture a bit. And, in collaboration with someone who knows installation better than me has been a lot of fun. And you made a film. You made an experimental film as well. Yeah, I'm experimenting. I'm starting over in a way. It's humbling. A few years of fiddling around with making a film, along with a Dutch filmmaker friend of mine. His name's Joppe Rog, and we've been collaborating. And I have 6 minutes, so it's I'm humbled by the fact that anyone ever completes a full-length film, because I am shocked by how hard it is. But it's hard. I know, but I know. I didn't fully appreciate it until I tried. But it's been beautiful and an amazing learning experience. I've been using a 16 millimeter Bolex camera. It's a classic. Yeah, it's it's a magical tool, that camera. It is. Yeah. Oh, the title I didn't mention. I literally just changed the title. I mean, that's a part of my lack of certainty sometimes, is the very last minute I came across that picture or that object that said King, Queen, Jack. And I was always a little bit on the fence about using the title 19 Winters, 7 Springs. But after the show at the Eastman Museum, that picture happened, and that changed changed the title of the whole thing.
One last process question, because I think it's really important, and we aim to do some teaching here on the podcast. Editing for you seems to be the actual process of editing, not some of the stuff we've been talking about as far as thinking about things, but really getting into the nitty-gritty. Seems to be an extremely tactile process for you. And I know that you cut up your contact sheets into sort of playing cards and move those playing cards around and categorize them and put them into different boxes and take them out of boxes. And that just seems to me to be so much fun. Like, really, I'm not trying to be, sound shallow about it, but I think fun is important.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted you to talk a bit about that very tactile, physical way you have of editing work. And because, again, I do think it's really important to try and inject that good time into the process, especially at a point where it could be extremely difficult.
Yeah, I think fun and play, maybe play is even the better word, because it's really helpful. I do love the way the little contact sheets become like playing cards. I have a fascination with games and like the relationship between games and life, and so games.
Well, you always have a picture of a game in your body of work.
I do. It's a little bit of a weird. I know there's like with games, there's like a setting and a stage, and there's characters and players.
I love when I came upon it in King Queen Knave. I was like, there it is.
Yeah, exactly. I can't get away. I mean, it's like there's strategy in games, but then things happen outside your control because there's an element of chance, and there are these very clear power relationships between characters and games that like sometimes reveal things about life. And there's winners and losers. In some games, there's literally black and white, which I find interesting. And and then at some point the game is over, and that relates to life as well. The editing process, I love this idea of like shuffling. It's like shuffling or reshuffling a deck and spreading things out. Sometimes I'll randomly even place images next to each other, and I'm always just trying to see what happens, what the work can do. Because if I over determine it, sometimes if I plan it too much, over conceptualize it. At least for me, it's like it sometimes kills the experience for the viewer, because I want the viewer to have this experience sort of that I've had, which is like wandering around a place and not knowing what you'll find. And if I'm if I know too clearly, like, how I will edit it, then the viewer starts to feel that and see that, and then they know what to expect. And so play and chance becomes like really helpful in that process. Yeah. And also it's just nice to get away from the computer and like work with my hands. Yeah,
of course. Absolutely. So what are you working on now?
It's a great question. This is the first time in probably almost 20 years I don't have a major project cooking, like in the works. Usually I've got something slowly going in the background that I can always come back to, and I don't. And it's a little unsettling. It's a little exciting, I am a little scared that I'll like never come up with anything good again. But I think, I don't know, like I was talking about that 7-year gap between, the two books. In between, I was like, when I was finding my voice, I kind of wonder if I'm like going to have a gap now where it feels like unproductive and depressing, but like in the end is really helpful. That's what that's what I'm thinking. I think I'm hoping I'm entering a phase like that. So, but I guess it's to be determined.
Would that be okay?
Would what be okay?
If it was a while, how would you handle that?
I think it would be good. I think it would be good because, I mean, what's the rush? I don't know. Why do I need to make another book anytime soon? Like, it'll be fine if it's a bunch of years between this one and the next one. And I think I need to like pause actually, because I don't want to repeat myself. But if I don't do that, like, what is it that I'm going to do? And I just want to make sure the next thing I do feels new.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think all of your work feels very distinct. So I personally would be happy if the next project was just, a continuation of the visual language you've been using, because I think it's really magnificent. And, I'd be supportive and happy if it's something really different. But either way, I think we fans win with you, because I know it'll be about life and honest and complex and all those things. So, Greg, thank you so much for spending so much time with me today. Love talking with you, and it's just really been wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. It's really great to hear the way you speak about the work too. It's great to talk with someone who totally gets it, and I feel that way. So great to speak with you.
So give the kids a hug and kiss from me, and Ahndraya as well. And hopefully I will see you soon.
Okay. Yeah, I'll see you soon.
All right. Bye, babe.
Okay. Bye, Sasha.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is a production of the PhotoWork Foundation. Executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and the associate producer is Taylor Selsback. The show is also produced and edited by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. Music is by J. Walter Hawks. If you like the show and wish to find out more about the Foundation, please visit photowork.foundation and be sure to subscribe and review with all the stars on your listening platform.